And we're on. Welcome. First on the agenda is Yuval about permissions for bucket logging. Take it away.
Hey, so this is something that's kind of I kept out of the implementation for a while, but after a discussion with some people, it seems like this has to be addressed. So the way that currently, so in bucket logging, you have the source bucket, so where the operation is happening, and you have the log bucket where the actual logs are being written to. And the way that I did the ownership of the whole thing so far was that if you defined that a certain bucket is a source for logging or has bucket logging on it, and you define which bucket is the destination, then whenever I'm trying to write the log records to an object in the destination bucket, I kind of pretend that the person writing those records is the owner of the destination bucket. And the problem with this is that it means that if I have permission to define bucket logging on my bucket, then I'm getting implicit permissions to actually write into someone else's bucket. And this is a problem. So the way that AWS are addressing the same issue is that they have a special user, like a bucket logging user. It's a global user. And this is the user that is actually doing the writing to the destination bucket. And the way that you allow destination bucket to be a destination for bucket logging is that you add policy or ACLs that allow this special magical user to do put object into this bucket, and only and it like no one could be this user, so it's only something internal, so only for bucket logging. So this is the model that they kind of propose. I don't think it's very good because it kind of, if you allow bucket logging on your bucket, then anyone can log stuff to your bucket, not someone specific. So it's not very fine grained. And also this special user. So I'm not sure that we would like to follow that. I had a discussion earlier today with Matt, and he suggested to enhance the bucket policy to add special policy for writing bucket logs. So instead of what AWS are suggesting is to add put object, allow put object policy for this special user on the log bucket, to actually allow bucket logging policy or enable bucket logging policy for a specific user on the log bucket. So you have a very fine-grained control on who can write logs to your destination bucket. But I would like to kind of gather more ideas and feedback on that.
Shouldn't, I'm confused. Shouldn't you require, assuming no policies in set, shouldn't you require that the or have the logs been written in the context of the source bucket, like the source bucket owner?
No. The logs, and the reason is that in some cases you define, like, the bucket logging is part of the application, and in that sense, the person, it will be the same owner or of the source bucket and the log bucket. There could be other use cases where the logs are actually something done for administrative reasons, and also there could be, again, according to the spec, there could be many source buckets writing to the same destination bucket.
In which case you'd want to allow, like, say, okay, these users can, these owners of these buckets can, which where the policy comes, but
again, if we want to follow the specification from AWS, then
Mhm.
the log bucket could be owned by anyone, and there has to be policy that allow this special logging user to write into it. What we're thinking is that, I mean, one thing we can say is that in order to write logs to the destination bucket, then there has to be policy that would allow put object for the whoever writes to the source bucket, so they'll have permissions to write to the log bucket. But that would actually give them more permissions than we would like, because we don't want to give them permissions to just write objects to the log bucket. We just want to give them permissions to write logs to the log bucket. It's different.
Well, it feels that there are multiple levels there. But let's say you do have, like at the basic level, a user that owns both source and target buckets should be able to write that, right? And
Yeah.
the context of the write should be in the context of the whoever did the operation, or the source bucket's owner. Right? Now you can say that logs are being done leveraging this different context like Amazon is doing. In which case you need to be able to allow that, to give a policy that allows that. But at the basic level, you want to just allow the owners. Like if someone has permission to write to a target bucket, then them writing a log entry should also be allowed.
Yeah, I agree. That makes sense. I mean, again, this is not according to what AWS are doing, but it makes sense. So the question is, what if it's a different user? Then do we want to kind of say, okay, then put policy that this other user can just do a put object to your log bucket, and that would give them a little more power than we would like to, because we don't want them to be able to just upload their stuff there. We just want them to be able to write their logs there. Especially in the case that one log bucket kind of aggregates logs from many source buckets.
Well, I'll try not to invent the wheel, and if Amazon define the interface and the permission, to try to follow it. In that case.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the policy, the bucket policy example in that doc, and it grants access to the logging principal, which would essentially give global permissions, but then there are conditions on source ARN and source account that could be used to filter which buckets and which accounts/users can do that logging. So it seems like it gives enough flexibility to control who can use logging in your bucket, right?
But the permissions that they give them is to do a put object. So I'm not sure. So can they just do a put object regardless of logging, or because the principal is the special logging user, they cannot do a put object? I'm not sure how policy works.
Right. If that user sent a put object, then the user would be the principal, not the logging service.
Okay, so this means that what you suggest is to do follow what AWS is doing, and like, but do we have this verification of the policy, which is not against the principal, but against what you said, the extra configuration that they have there?
I don't know that source ARN and source account are added to the policy environment. So we would have to add that for the logging requests. I don't think that we have implemented service principles either, so we would need to make that work.
Hmm.
I'm thinking that we would have to inherit from the auth identity or identity applier.
Okay. So what you're saying is that the best option is to enhance our policy support so that would match the AWS model.
I don't know if it's the best option, and Matt in chat seems to disagree.
Sorry, I didn't follow what you said.
That says, not clear, we want a logging user. Why do we need service principles? I think this is just so that we're
Yeah, I think
compatible with AWS here.
Yeah, I mean, I think this combination of a logging of a service principal, which is the logging user, together with the regular like user ARN, is kind of equivalent to what Matt suggested, that that will be like a special policy for bucket logging. Like this combination, this specific combination is kind of an equivalent, right? Because then it's only our internal code that would be kind of pretending to be this service principal, and it's the and we'll take the user from the original request and verify the policy against that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I see another comment from Matt regarding quota. Yeah, I'm not sure what is the right solution there.
Matt asking if we introduce service principles, do they apply elsewhere? No, I think if we implement it as an auth identity, then no actual auth engines would use that. We would only construct this service identity in the logging code when it's checking permission to log something to a given bucket.
Yeah, and then it's going to be a relatively, I mean, that's going to be some extra work that I'm going to do in the bucket policy infrastructure just for this use case of bucket logging.
True, but I've seen service principles come up elsewhere. I think that their bucket replication defaults to a service principle, and we don't do that. So I think that if we build the infrastructure for service principles, then we would find other uses for them.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, there is value in following the same the same path as AWS. I mean, it's going to make sense for other people, and going to be easier on the integration when somebody needs to put a policy on the log bucket, because that's just going to be.
Well, I guess, but I think I'm sorry I'm doing this because I didn't want to. I'm making a difficult time with it with the texting, I guess. I mean, I don't think we should introduce service principles here and then align them elsewhere. So if you say, Casey, that service principles are needed for doing things like put bucket replication, we've already got a replication system that doesn't use service principles. So we should have unification in designs rather than forking paths. Does that make sense? So in other words, if you think we should have service principles, we should be using them in other places we do service principle-like stuff. Seemingly.
I agree.
Okay. I mean, so yeah, I think if we can find unification in it and want to like it, yeah, that seems fine.
Yeah. I mean, something that something else we can do is just use the basic policies and tell them that the owner of the source bucket needs to have a put object policy on the log bucket. I mean, it's that's going to allow.
I agree with you with your original comment about that. I mean, if we're going to that seems too open to permission to me. I mean, right? Because they can put other stuff. We don't. It's just weird. I think.
Right. Yes. Especially so. I mean, for example, for the use case of using bucket logging for backups, for example, then the owner of the source bucket doesn't need any permissions on the log bucket, right? They would never use those logs. It's a different application that would just have get and delete permissions on the log bucket to do the backups, and whatever application that is writing to the source bucket doesn't even know that this thing exists. So
yeah, in that case, the quota thing might resolve itself too. You probably need to figure out how much space the backup system needs, and it pays for it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm missing something about the discussions with quota, but quota is always going to be accounted to the bucket owner, right? And it seems like what we want here.
I think so. But it's going to be, it's something that's going to come up. So I mean, maybe it's all handled by ordinary lifecycle policy or other things. But bucket logging is going to claim space.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, like, I can try and I mean, adding standard infrastructure is never something really bad. I mean, even if it's used only in one place, maybe in the future it'll be used in other places, and maybe in the future we can converge other implementations that might benefit from it. Usually, the using standard ideas is, they're there because people needed them for all kind of reasons, and therefore they're usually something useful. So I can add the service principle feature to the policy, and even if currently it's going to be used only in context of this feature, of the bucket logging feature, Maybe in the future this could be used in other places, or maybe we can converge implementations to this if needed.
All right, well, I'm happy to share some pointers to relevant code for this, the identity applier interface, and then the environment that you can pass the source ARN and account in.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great if you can send me some pointers, and I'll try to implement that.
Okay, and there was a separate question about ACLs, right? Do we want to try to support both?
I mean, in the AWS documentation, they kind of recommend not to use ACLs for that. I'm not sure why.
Can we kill ACLs for as many things as possible?
I mean, this is kind of one feature. I think doing this extra infrastructure work just for the sake of bucket logging should be enough. And I mean, not supporting ACL, or I'll rephrase, not doing this permission model is a permission problem. Not supporting ACLs is, maybe somebody would ask for that. Maybe we'll add it in the future. Doesn't matter, right? We can just wait for somebody to actually need
AWS
that.
is moving in the direction of there not being ACLs anymore.
Yeah, so for sure, we shouldn't implement that at that point. I think fixing the permission model is critical because it creates a security issue.
Yeah, agreed. And with the ACL strategy, you have to grant directly to the log group. So there's no way to filter users or source buckets. It's just a global thing. Okay. All right, is everybody agreed on this? Adam, as a IAM policy person, do you have any thoughts?
No objections. I mean, I kind of feel like we're going to run out of. We're going to need a longer word to hold all of our permission checks, but that's not a bad thing.
On the IAM parsing or policy parsing side, I think we'll need to teach it about service principles, but I doubt that'll be hard.
Yeah.
All right. Any more thoughts before we move on? Okay. Next couple of topics are from Sina. Sina, I added this first one about your object deletes. Sorry, your bucket deletes because it came up in the performance call, Mark Nelson's Thursday performance call last week. And I wanted to follow up on that here.
Hey, sure. I mean, I can give you a background that why did I come up with this? It was I tried to put it in the PR. Basically, it was about when we start resharding some buckets, and they are usually versioned bucket that they go above this maximum 200,000 keys per OMAP object. And then when we start resharding them, if they are already holding, like, for example, 700 or 1,000 shards, then the deletion, because the default value for max AIO on bucket index visits or anything that we used as a single source of configuration is 128 at a time, then 128 OMA objects at a time will be requested to be deleted. And then at the Rados layer, apparently it just excessively starts just writing just write like sequential write, and then produces gigabytes per second, and then it just causes a big problem to the cluster because it just gets unavailable if there's no enough capacity to handle that. So I thought that maybe if we could control that by how many, well, the ideal is probably go one by one and delete them because they still have the entries in them and they are not empty shards, then that would probably kind of eliminate the case that it just goes harshly deleting so many keys at a time. Although I mean, I use the configuration which is globally now works, and I put, for example, 2 as a concurrency, but it is still hurts. So I believe maybe the real fix would be we delete keys first and then delete the OMAP objects, so it would be more graceful, maybe like deleting them by 1,000 or 1,000 batches and then delete the object, because I'm not sure how Rados reacts when you ask it to please delete an OMAP object which contains, for example, 300 or 400,000 keys in it. If it just goes sequential writing zeros, then probably that might be the problem that I'm facing, which causes gigabytes of per second on a single disk. But yeah, that was the initial thought of controlling this at least.
Yeah. OMAP delete performance has historically been a pain point, but I thought that BlueStore or RocksDB was now using delete range to delete the entire range in a single call. So I'm surprised that this is still an issue. But kind of reliving PTSD from the multi-site log trimming pain. Like it's just really hard for RGW as a client to model what the performance of its deletes are going to be like, to know whether we need to throttle or not. And I don't know, I feel like even if it's expensive for OSDs to do this, RGW still wants to do concurrent ones so that the operation doesn't take forever. If we go one by one on a bucket with thousands of shards, then a delete bucket op is going to take forever.
I guess for delete bucket operation from the API side, because we make sure the bucket is empty before doing so, it should be fast because the OMAPs are already empty. So I think that shouldn't affect that. It's just the resharding process that would be affected, which I guess that the time that is consumed to reshard, which bucket is probably be blocked, wouldn't be that much regarding the deletion. If it, for example, the deletion of shards takes, for example, 10 minutes, but the resharding is already taking hours, that would be a problem rather than taking the cluster into a bad situation.
So I mean, with delete bucket, even if all the shards are empty, it would still have to one by one send round trips to each shard. And if there are thousands of those, then the latency is going to add up.
Right. I guess we can then assume that because the delete API is ensure that the bucket is empty, then we can just use the other configuration to do so. So we only keep this configuration for reshard, and then we probably rename that.
Hmm. Okay. Well, for reshard, at least the cleanup step of the old bucket index happens after we've unblocked writes to the new index, so that latency wouldn't show up for client requests at least. So I guess that I don't object to a separate config option for that, but I still think that 1 is not the right default for that. I mean, you would only put it to 1 if you're seeing problems in your cluster, I think. And from the RGW side, I had assumed that we wouldn't in general see problems from this.
Yeah, 1 would be very surprising as a default. We don't see in general, the population of Ceph users or this issue.
Correct. I mean, well, what I'm still observing and experiencing is the buckets that they already have reached. I mean, they go over 200,000 keys per OMAP object. Even with concurrency of 2, which I have already configured, that still causes a gigabyte of per second sequential write on the OSD level, which takes, like, for example, even 5 minutes or something. So even though if I go one by one, apparently maybe there's some still async process running on OSD that keeps
Well,
the
sure.
load going.
There's
Right.
compaction. There's compaction.
Okay.
I mean, there's a thing going on in Rock. There's a whole universe of RocksDB in there. We haven't got a workaround for that right now, but the future is another system.
Right. So I mean, if we
And so how and also how you're getting into, and it's very potentially relevant, how your OSD is constructed, what kind of storage is there, whether what kind of latency the RocksDB compaction process sees, whether it's able to, as Katie said, there a lot of optimizations going on over the years to avoid inline compactions, but the compaction has to happen eventually.
But the delete, but the compaction happens exactly the same time that RGW requested to delete it. I mean,
That would be because RocksDB is convinced that it must compact.
I see.
So it's a workload estimation inside of RocksDB that's driving it.
Okay, so then I mean, okay, with that, so if we keep the concurrency high, still that would cause more problem because it just asks more to do the deletion, and then the load just goes up more than, it gets worse rather than gets controlled.
I mean, in general, I would expect that a lot of the shards are placed on different PGs and OSDs. So I'm surprised that setting that to 2 was significantly worse. Maybe we should revisit the RocksDB delete range thing and make sure that we're actually using that. I expected that we were. I can bring this up again tomorrow in the performance call and see if I can get Mark Nelson to help us investigate this.
That would be great. Thank you. I'll try also to join if needed any information.
Yeah, that would be great. Should be on the community calendar. So yeah, just to summarize, I don't object to a separate config for reshard specifically, but I would hope that a default more like 8 or 16 would work as a minimum. But we can follow up tomorrow with Mark. I can add a comment to your PR just so that there's a paper trail of this. Anybody else have thoughts here? Okay, moving on. Next, copy object encryption. I noticed that Stalebot closed Marcus's PR yesterday, and Sina reopened it.
Yeah, I need to at least push what I've got.
Okay, so I mean, just I wanted to see that if there's anything that can be contributed to help, I would be happy to help in terms of test cases or anything. Other than that,
Sure.
if it's ready to go, then I just wanted to follow up. Nothing more. Thank you.
Yeah, no, the things are left to do with it is update it to the current base, and I've got a separate test script that should be folded into Teuthology.
Yeah, I would like to see that stuff in S3 tests with our other encryption. So whatever Sina and I can do to help make that happen.
Okay, well, I should push it.
Push your script as is.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, moving on. I have a topic about S3 tests. For quite a while, it hasn't been running on recent Fedora. And unpinning the Bodo core version fixes that, but caused a bunch of other failures. So I have a PR that works through those. It was pinned to an old Bodo version because they broke SIG v2 at some point. I think that was long enough ago that we don't really care. So I just disabled the SIG v2 tests that were failing. And it passed Teuthology, and I saw an approval from Sina, thanks. So if there are no objections, I'll try to merge this today. And then there was a tangential question following up on discussion from last week's CDM about moving S3 tests into the Ceph repo. I don't know that we decided on that yet.
So there was a Slack discussion as well, maybe happening in parallel. I think what came up in, at least in Slack, was the ease of actually running S3 tests in Tautology when you're developing tests. So moving the repo into the Ceph repo is one way of making that easier. But I think that adding, at least to me, adding a tautology command or tautology flag that allows you to do that automatically would also kind of unlock the problem or make the whole process easier, so people would merge their S3 tests or S3 test PR more easily.
Yeah, I don't know. Even with helper scripts to manage sweep branches and stuff, I still don't think that we can really fix the current process in that merging S3 test branches will break Toothology runs on other branches. And so I feel like having them both in the same Git repo is the only way to make that seamless. It also has benefits for backports too, because in general, we just backport the Ceph PRs and only remember that there were S3 tests if QA fails on the backport.
Yeah, I mean, most of the tests I'm writing, or I mean, until now, let's say all the bucket notification tests were actually not part of S3 tests, and they were just under SRC test in the Ceph repo, and that was quite easy. Also, as you said, for backporting, because you can see the code change and the test change in the same PR, and you can just just do the backport. So there is value there. I agree. I think the motivation around the separate repo was that it's not necessarily only for RGW or Ceph. In theory, it's a S3 test suite for anything, right?
Yeah. In the past, we definitely had aspirations to build a community around this and have it as kind of the de facto compliance suite. But we just haven't had any resources on our end to foster that community, and so it's kind of languished. It does seem that other projects are using it in some form. I'm not really sure that moving it into the Ceph tree would make it significantly harder for people to use it. But contributions might be more difficult.
Yeah, that's kind of a messy area. I mean, the one, a lot of folks, check it out and use it across many open source projects and corporate projects. And having to check out all of Ceph to get it would probably annoy people, especially if we're changing it to make that happen. We could talk about other stuff like people proposing new S3 test suites within SNIA that's being discussed in a working group. Whether it comes from, it's not certain that it will come to fruition and when it would happen anyway.
Yeah, well, I would welcome more S3 test suites that we could add to Toothology, but I mean, is there some way that we can have the best of both worlds here? I haven't really been able to find one. For example, like adding S3 tests as a submodule to Ceph would still have the same problems about conflicts.
How so? I mean, it seems like that would help. We'd have to pull it up occasionally.
We would have to pull it up for every pull request that adds tests.
Well, exactly so. But at least it's a process that's concentrated in the Ceph repo. I mean, I don't know.
What would be the process in this case? I mean, let's say that I write a feature and I write the tests.
What you do is you'd have a, well, is that right? I mean, no, yeah, it's just as bad because you need an external repo. Your changes are in another repo.
Right, they're not.
They have to be merged anyway at first, anyway, in order for a pull up to deal with it. So that's messy.
And and that won't fix the tautology thing. That I want to just run a tautology test, and that.
If there's some something that would help. I mean, maybe if there's something other than, if we can remove the pieces of the logic that require pointing to something with other commits on it to do the change, right?
So
Could we
that
change
was
something to the submission process that says I want to run this test with this S3 tests?
yeah. So this is what I propose. I propose that instead of temporarily changing my Ceph commit to have this file pointing to where I made the S3 test change, to just have the tautology script change that on the test machine temporarily, so it's not a new branch or commit or anything, and just grab the test from wherever I'm pointing that to, and that would be just a tautology command without any commits or pushes or anything.
Yeah,
It has
that's
to do with
that's interesting. I thought the proposal was to change was to incorporate like, S3 test, but that was in another the other discussion only. That sounds interesting to me. I mean, there's no like if this is tractable. I mean, it sounds more interesting.
I mean, it won't solve the backporting issue and all that stuff. That would still be a problem and require much more discipline. But at least it won't be such a big headache to run tautology test against like a dev branch of S3 tests.
Yeah, I don't know. I see that as just kind of simplifying the step of creating a separate sweep branch and scheduling against that, but it doesn't really solve any of the other problems.
Right. I mean, one way we can think about solving the backporting issue, I mean, assuming that you use the backporting script, then maybe there's something we can do there, because then we can have a way to automate that. For example, you would have to provide the S3 test commits that are associated with the Ceph commit or Ceph PR or tracker. Actually, the script gets a tracker. So, somehow pass the information, and then not sure, but I mean, when you run the script, you run that inside the Ceph project, and if there are conflicts or anything, then you fix them on the spot. There could be conflicts in the S3 test, then you'll have to fix them somewhere. So I'm not sure it's a good idea.
Okay, well, tracker issues have the pull request ID field, and that's what the Ceph backport script uses. We could potentially add a S3 test PR ID that points at the S3 test repo, and it could try to do that. Probably only want that in the RGW project, but doesn't mean that Ceph backport couldn't know about it.
Yep.
So is the consensus then that we don't want to move tests into the Ceph repo?
I mean, I'm looking at the list of contributors to the S3 test suite, and it's lots of people that are also RGW contributors. But as Matt said, those are the contributors. The users could be all over the place. So
I mean, they usually fork it. There are forks all over. There are forks on GitHub, but there are other kinds of forks.
And even on the contributor list, there are many people that are not RGW developers.
Yeah, and I mean, if we were more active in reviewing and fixing issues, then there would probably be more contributions. But
Yeah, true. If you want to deter contributors, never merge their PRs, they would never submit another one.
with git clone, isn't there a way to clone like just a subdirectory of a repo? So I mean, like other people that don't want all of Ceph could still clone just the S3 tests directory somehow.
There is, but no one's gonna figure how to do that. It doesn't make sense. That's not the experience that you want to provide.
Yeah, I'm not sure it makes sense for Git, right? Because directories can change as the lifetime of the project. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, are you looking to fetch one specific folder from the repo?
I think that was what Casey asked about. Yeah, so I didn't follow the conversation. I was out for a few minutes. But it seems to me like if you wanna maintain tracking of which Ceph version matches S3 test version, and you want something in the Ceph repository, that would be like putting it in a fab module. I don't know if you consider that, but there's limited use for that, really, because the Ceph repo itself does not use anything from that repo.
All right, well, any other thoughts on S3 tests?
I don't know, maybe if somebody wants to be like a maintainer for the project, and that would also make it more friendly for the open source community. I do see there are quite a bit of forks, and I think there are many forks that people are just updating locally on their fork and not even pushing to the main fork because they just use it to do all kind of testing.
That does suggest that we might have luck if we called out on the mailing list and asked if anyone wants to be maintainer, at least. I know we had talked about doing that potentially before.
Yeah, we can give it a try, I think.
At least I know when we had discussed it before, we had the idea that we would either want to try to find someone who would be willing to take over maintainership or fold it into Ceph, one of those two.
Yeah, a maintainer would be great, as long as I mean, if they're going to approve and merge things, then we need to ensure that the RGW suite stays green. So
Yeah,
I
we
think
would
also
basically.
the split between a master and Ceph master branch helps with that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the main part of finding a maintainer is we'd want something we do want, whatever maintainer we have does have to be someone embedded in the Ceph community. Otherwise, we aren't getting any benefit from it, I think. But I do think if we can't find a maintainer, then folding the two together is the only way to go.
How would folding them together would solve anything?
Oh, I mean, it would solve because you would write the test together with your code. It will all bundled in one PR, and tautology is easy, backports are easy. The thing is that it's kind of, if you want to use the Ceph suite, the SW test suite, you have to clone the entire Ceph repo for that.
I don't. Yeah, well, it's not every test only for Ceph. That's why we have Ceph master, not you know.
Yes,
Like,
we know that historically that had been the case, but at present we're not actually.
so let's scale a project that's pretty much very successful. One of our most successful side projects that is being used widely used around.
Widely used, yes, but we aren't actually merging in and taking advantage of it being widely used by the community as an open source project.
So
and we're making our own use of it more difficult by that. Like, in order to take advantage of that, we'd need a maintainer to justify making our own use more difficult. But if we can't get a maintainer, then we're paying the cost and getting no benefit, is the calculus as we see it. Well, Casey, Matt, and I think.
No, I disagree in every aspect of this.
I mean, the benefit is that there is a unified test suite that everyone uses.
Right.
It is, but we aren't actually maintaining the unified test suite for the community.
I mean, also, I'm not on the side promoting.
Oh, you're not? I thought you were.
No, I'm not really. Yeah, I mean, I sort of feel like I mean, I understand that it is a pain in the butt. I mean, I did say words that imply my feeling that it's been painful to work on SW tests a bit, but it's manageable and it's more. I mostly feel it's its own thing. I feel like the amount of participation from outside, the amount of use of SW tests from outside of Ceph is significant. I'm not completely sure it's entirely healthy, and I don't know what the future will bring, but at the moment that's the case.
Oh yeah, there's outside use. I mean, I won't deny that. Like, if we can find a maintainer or figure out how to resource someone to run S3 tests, then that would be the best of all possible worlds, basically. If we could get someone from, I don't know, maybe some other company would be interested in devoting resources to it. I don't know. I think the next step here is to see about calling to see if anyone's interested, I guess, and figuring out the best way to do that.
Right. So on Slack, Joseph was like he was the one that brought up the issue. So maybe he's not in this call, but maybe he'll be interested in doing that.
That's a point. That's a good point.
All right, well, we're over time. I appreciate everybody's feedback here. I think it's a complicated issue that we can carry on to next week. Any final thoughts before we end? All right. Thanks, everybody. See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.